As we all know, one of the hardest contents within honkaistarrail is the memory of chaos. But what if we tried to make it even harder? What if we tried to do memory of chaos without any relics at all? After thinking it through, I decided to lay down these following rules. 1. No limited 5-star banner characters. I wanted to see how far people could get without ever using one of the amazing 5-star characters, which could turn the tides around for any battle. 2. Relics cannot be equipped at all. We're taking them all off, boys. 3. Any light cone can be used. Without relics, the bonus abilities of higher superimpositions wouldn't affect the DMG too much. Hence, I decided not to limit any light cones. Whales, feel free to use your superimposition 5-star limited light cones. Lastly, no restriction on idle lawns, as you cannot under the level once you leveled it already. With all of this in mind, I decided to push forward with the challenge. As this was my very first attempt in doing Memory of Chaos without any relics, I had no idea what I was going in. In fact, I completely disregarded about the Memory Turbulence and decided solely on teams that could weakness break opponents. Memory Turbulence is a unique buff that changes within the Memory of Chaos. In the current iteration, it would increase the amounts of hits dealt to enemies when we break their weaknesses or hit them when they are weakness broken. The damage of the hits will be based on the max HP of the enemies. For the first stage, I noticed that the first half was filled with ice weakness enemies. With this in mind, I decided to run a team that focuses on it. For the sustain, I decided to go with Jeppard. His immense shields and his technique to put a shield on my team was essential in staying alive. For my DPS unit, I decided to go with Herta, mainly because she was leveled, whereas Yanqing was not. Totally not hating on Yanqing here, I swear. As for the remaining 2 spots, I decided to run a standard buffer and do buffer composition of using Hanya and Pela. It was here I realized my first mistake. Running Pela and Hanya for her debuffs and buffs were a silly choice. The damage output from Herta was minuscule to the point where it would take ages for me to defeat the enemy mobs, and that both of them were basically useless. Fortunately, it did allow me to realize that in this kind of challenge, the Memory Turbulence was king. The damage output from the Memory Turbulence was many times higher than my own damage from my units. As such, I needed to build a team composition centering about it. Luckily for me, I was able to realize this quite early on, and I was able to beat the first half. As for the second half, I immediately noticed that all the enemies were weak to physical damage. As such, I knew that the core of my team had to be Clara. I mean, who wouldn't want to use her? As for the rest, I decided to put March 7th and Natasha for a double sustain composition and use Immune for the additional energy recharge. I did consider other units to charge up the Memory Turbulence, but none of the units I considered, such as Himiko and Shui Yi, could apply weakness break easily. Hence, I decided to go all in on Clara. It was actually simple, where Clara fires off counters and counters with Natasha and March 7th helping to sustain the team. It did take a while though to complete this half, and here was the first stage complete. With the new information about Memory Turbulence being the most important factor in this challenge, I tackled on stage 2. Similar to the first stage, the first half was weak to ice. However, an additional fire weakness on enemies instantly made me change my plans. I immediately placed in Himiko alongside Herta for the composition. If you didn't know, they work wonders together. Moreover, Himiko was a perfect unit in this situation, as she could apply follow-up attacks after weakness break, which would quickly help stack up the Memory Turbulence. As for the rest of the team, I decided to run double sustain for survival purposes, as my team was getting to the point where they could be killed within 3 to 4 hits. With Himiko joining the team, the amount of stacks on the Memory Turbulence was quickly increased. Stage 2 was much quicker than Stage 1. As for the second half, all of the enemies were weak to quantum. As a response, I immediately decided to run Shui Yi. Shui Yi is a new character that came out in this current patch, but she is quite strong in terms of destroying toughness bars. As for the remaining units, Tingyun was used once again to help with the energy regeneration. As for the rest, I opted to use Clara and Lynx. Although I could have used Bailu instead of Clara for another double sustain composition, I didn't fancy having 2 sustains in this half. There was already a lack of attackers to help trigger the Memory Turbulence. Hence, I decided to use Clara, who could reduce damage taken during her ultimate. Plus, she was an ideal target for Lynx, whose skill would increase the taunt value of Clara. With a close shave, I barely managed to survive through this stage, with Tingyun and Shui Yi dying in the very end. Typically of Tingyun though, It was now time for stage 3. After looking at the enemies, I knew that this was going to be one of the hardest stages. There wasn't a big issue with the first half, but the second half had Svarog, with the ability to summon an auxiliary robot arm unit that could take hold of one of my units. This could spell disaster the moment he takes away one of my units. This was especially the case with my units having such low HP that only a few hits was required to take out my team. Knowing this, I jumped straight into stage 3. There wasn't much change in the first half as the enemies were mainly weak to fire and ice damage. Himiko and her spinning to win was enough to clear up the stage. But that was a different case in the second half. There wasn't a consistent weakness aside from wind. Both my Sampo and Dan Heng wasn't built, so there was no choice but to go choose other weaknesses to target. In this case, I chose lightning and physical. Clara, being one of the units I had from the start, was the option for me to go for physical. As for lightning, I chose Serval for her low-cost ultimates that could allow me to potentially break the auxiliary robot arm unit that Svarog would summon and free my unit immediately. With this in mind, I decided to stick with Lynx and Tingyun. Although the first part of the second half was quite easy, Svarog was a whole different story. The moment it summoned the robot arm, I was instantly placed in a disadvantage. There was nothing I could do. I knew that I would soon reach the point where I couldn't continue, but I never thought that it would be due to Svarog. With this, I figured out that was pretty much my own limits. Stage 3. Perhaps I'll try again in another Memory of Chaos with a new Memory Turbulence, but for now, I decided it was the end. For the last stage, I'll leave up my final run for you to watch and see. I don't think there's any method to beat it with such low HP units, as there was no method for me to sustain against Svarog with him. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. If there are any other weird challenges you would like me to try, please let me know down on the comments.